The key was still warm from Kyle's pocket when he set it on the DMV counter like he was closing a business deal. "Come on, Tessa, don't make this weird in front of the guy," he said, not even looking at me, smiling at the stranger beside him instead. "You always do this. You disappear for months and then act like the world stopped without you." The buyer, a heavy-set man in a golf shirt holding a cashier's check, looked between us like he was watching a tennis match he hadn't paid to see. Behind the counter, a DMV clerk with reading glasses pushed low on her nose picked up the title Kyle had slid toward her, turned it over once, and said the sentence that stopped all three of us cold. "Sir, your name isn't on this title anywhere." "Whose name is Tessa Monroe." If you've ever had a family member decide your things were theirs to manage while you weren't looking, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments what they called it when you finally said no. My name is Tessa Monroe. I'm 37 years old, and I work as a field nurse for a medical relief charity based out of Phoenix, Arizona. My job takes me overseas for stretches of 2, 3, sometimes 4 months at a time, setting up mobile clinics in places that don't have running water half the year, let alone a functioning postal system. I've drawn blood in tents during sandstorms. I've kept vaccine logs in 3 languages. I know how to document things precisely, because in my line of work, if you don't write it down exactly right, someone can die from the mistake. That habit followed me home. It just took my own family to show me why I needed it. I bought my car, a silver 2019 Honda CR-V, with my own money 4 years ago. I paid it off in 31 months by picking up extra deployments and skipping vacations. The title was in my name only. The registration was in my name only. The insurance policy, the storage agreement I signed with my parents when I left for my last long deployment, all of it. My name only. I want you to remember that detail because it's the whole spine of what happened next. My parents, Janet and Paul Monroe, still live in the same house in Tempe where I grew up. My brother Kyle is 34, 3 years younger than me. And for most of our adult lives, he's had a talent for turning other people's stability into his own convenience. He calls it helping. He's called overdrafting my old joint savings account helping. He's called borrowing Dad's truck for 6 months without asking helping. So when I left for a 4-month deployment to a clinic outside Nairobi last spring, and I asked my parents if I could park my CR-V in their driveway and store it there since my apartment lease was ending, and I didn't want to pay for a storage lot I wouldn't be able to check on. I thought I was doing the responsible thing. I even drew up a simple 1-page storage agreement, something I'd learned to do from work, where every asset needs a paper trail. My dad signed it as the property host. My name was the only name listed as owner. I made copies, I kept one, gave my parents one, and scanned a third into a folder on my phone labeled Home Admin, right next to my vaccine records and my passport scan. I didn't think I needed to prepare a legal shield to protect a car from my own family, but 4 months is a long time. And apparently long enough for my brother to convince himself that helping meant selling it out from under me to a stranger with a cashier's check. Before I get to the counter, though, I want to walk you through what those 4 months actually looked like from where I was standing, because the suffering didn't start at the DMV. It started long before that, in small cuts I didn't even feel until I added them up. The first cut came about 3 weeks into my deployment, when I called home on a scratchy satellite line to check on my mail. My mother answered, cheerful as ever, and mentioned offhand that Kyle had borrowed my car twice to take his kids to soccer practice because his own car was in the shop. I remember standing outside our supply tent, phone pressed to my ear, dust in my teeth, saying, "Okay, that's fine. Just make sure he puts gas back in it." She laughed and said, "You worry about the weirdest things." I didn't think about it again until I got home and found the odometer reading 900 miles higher than it should have been for a car that was supposedly sitting in a driveway. The second cut came in month 2, when my father sent me a photo of the driveway. My car parked exactly where I'd left it. Except there was a new dent above the rear wheel well that hadn't been there before. When I asked about it in a text, my dad wrote back, "Not sure. Might have been the mailman's truck backing up." "No big deal. Don't worry about it," from over there. I remember reading that message in a clinic tent lit by a single bulb, surrounded by boxes of donated antibiotics, thinking, that's my car. That's not nothing. But there was nothing I could do from 6,000 miles away except let it go. The third cut was smaller, but it stuck with me the longest. My mother sent me a group text with a photo of Kyle's youngest daughter sitting in the driver's seat of my CRV, grinning. Hands on the wheel like she was driving it somewhere. The caption said, "Someone's excited for her first car someday." I remember staring at that photo on a cracked phone screen in a hostel room in Nairobi, feeling something twist in my stomach that I couldn't name yet. Some early recognition that, in my family's mind, my car had quietly become a shared family resource instead of the thing I had worked overtime for 2.5 years to pay off. The fourth cut happened when I got back to Phoenix. I flew in exhausted, jet-lagged, carrying 2 duffel bags and a stack of medical logs I still needed to file. And the first thing I noticed pulling up to my parents' house in an Uber was that my car wasn't in the driveway. It was in the garage, tucked behind Kyle's old bike rack and a stack of moving boxes I didn't recognize. Half covered with a tarp, like something being hidden rather than stored. When I asked my mother about it, she said, "Kyle just wanted to keep it out of the sun, that's all. Don't read into it." The fifth cut was a receipt. I found it wedged in the driver's side door pocket a few days later while I was cleaning out fast food wrappers that weren't mine. A car detailing receipt from a shop I'd never used, dated while I was still overseas, paid for in cash, with a note scrawled at the bottom that said, "Prep for showing." I remember sitting in the driver's seat in my parents' driveway, holding that slip of paper, feeling the first real chill of understanding that something had been in motion the entire time I was gone, something I hadn't been told about at all. The sixth cut, the one that finally made the shape of it clear, was a text message I found still open on my mother's kitchen tablet, one she must have forgotten to close. It was a message thread between her and Kyle from 2 months earlier, where Kyle had written, "I've got a buyer lined up for Tessa's car. Guy's paying cash. We should just handle it before she gets back. Easier that way." My mother had responded with a single word. "Fine." I stood in that kitchen holding the tablet with my hands shaking, not from anger yet, but from the particular kind of disorientation you feel when you realize the people who are supposed to protect your things were the ones planning to give them away. I didn't confront anyone that day. I did something I'd learned to do on the job instead. I documented. That was the pivot for me. The moment I stopped hoping this was a misunderstanding and started building a file. I have spent years in places where a missing signature on a consent form or a mismatched patient name on a medication log can cost someone their life. I know how to build a paper trail that holds up under pressure. Because in my work, trust me isn't an acceptable answer when someone's health is on the line. It shouldn't have taken me that long to apply the same standard to my own family. But grief about people you love clouds your judgment in ways that professional distance never does. So I stopped asking my mother vague questions and started building a folder instead. I pulled the title from my file cabinet, the one with my name listed as sole owner, VIN matching exactly, no liens, Nothing shared. I pulled the registration renewal from earlier that year. Again, my name only, mailed to my apartment before I gave it up. Forwarded to my parents' address with my explicit instruction attached in an email that said, "Please just hold my mail here while I'm gone. Don't open anything car-related. I'll handle registration myself when I'm back." I pulled my insurance policy statement, which listed me as the sole named insured and sole authorized driver. No additional drivers ever added, because I never authorized Kyle to be added. Not once, not for soccer practice, not for anything. I pulled the one-page storage agreement my father had signed. The one that specifically said the vehicle belonged to Tessa Monroe and was being stored temporarily at the Monroe residence with no transfer of ownership implied. I even pulled a screenshot of that kitchen tablet conversation before I set it back down exactly where I found it. Because I've learned that evidence you don't secure the moment you see it can conveniently disappear later. I didn't confront Kyle that week. I let him think I hadn't seen anything. I went quiet, which in my family gets mistaken for calm agreement, when really it's the sound of someone counting. I called the DMV to check what the actual process would require for a private vehicle sale, because I wanted to know exactly what obstacle Kyle would hit if he tried to go through with it. The answer was simple, and honestly, a relief. A private sale transfer in Arizona requires the seller's name to match the name on the title, along with a valid ID. No third party can complete that transfer on someone else's behalf without power of attorney documentation, which nobody in my family had, because nobody had ever asked me for it. I hung up that call and felt something settle in my chest for the first time in weeks. Kyle could plan all he wanted. He could find a buyer, negotiate a price, shake hands over the hood of my car in my parents' driveway. But the moment he walked up to a DMV counter, the system itself was going to ask him a question he couldn't answer, because his name had never belonged on that piece of paper to begin with. I decided not to warn him. I decided to let the appointment happen. That decision cost me something. I won't pretend it didn't. Waiting felt like standing still while a fire burned closer. Knowing I could put it out early, but choosing to let it get big enough that everyone would finally see it. But I also knew that if I confronted Kyle privately, my mother would smooth it over into a misunderstanding. My father would call it no big deal, and the sale might just get rescheduled quietly for a week I wasn't watching. I needed a witness who had no emotional stake in protecting Kyle's feelings. I needed the DMV. I found out about the appointment because Kyle, in a rare moment of carelessness, I texted my mother asking if she wanted to come along to see the car off, and she forwarded it to me by mistake, still thinking she was forwarding it to my father. I didn't respond to the text. I just wrote the date and time in my planner, the same planner where I track vaccine schedules and clinic staffing, and I made sure I would be standing at that DMV counter before either of them arrived. I got there 40 minutes early. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot, my folder of documents on the passenger seat, and I watched the door. Kyle showed up with a man I didn't recognize, the buyer, a guy named Gary, according to the cashier's check he was carrying, folded in his shirt pocket. They were laughing about something as they walked in. Easy and casual, like men closing a deal on a lawnmower instead of a paid-off vehicle that belonged to someone who wasn't even in the room in their imagination. I waited 2 minutes, then walked in behind them, keeping my folder against my chest. The DMV lobby was the kind of fluorescent, overly air-conditioned room you'd expect. Rows of blue plastic chairs, a number dispenser, a wall of motivational posters about safe driving that nobody reads. I took a number, sat 3 rows behind Kyle and Gary, and watched Kyle chat easily with him about the car's maintenance history, some of which I noticed he was making up on the spot. describing an oil change schedule that had never happened because I do my own oil changes and log every single one in a spreadsheet, a habit I picked up from tracking medication inventory. When Kyle's number was called before mine, I stood and walked up right behind him, close enough that Gary noticed me before Kyle did. "Hi, Kyle," I said, my voice even, not raised at all. "I think there's something you should probably know before you two go any further with this." Kyle turned around, and I watched the surprise flicker across his face before he smoothed it into something performative, something meant for Gary's benefit more than mine. "Tessa! Great, perfect timing," he said, his tone shifting into the same easy salesman charm he'd used the whole way through the lobby. "This is actually good. You can help me confirm a couple details for Gary here." "I'm not here to confirm anything," I said. "I'm here because that's my car." Gary's eyebrows went up. He looked at Kyle, who let out a short laugh, the kind meant to diffuse tension by making the other person look unreasonable. "Come on, Tessa, don't make this weird in front of the guy," Kyle said. "You always do this. You disappear for months and then act like the world stopped without you. It's been sitting in a driveway collecting dust. Somebody had to actually manage it. You practically abandoned it." I remember that word landing in a very specific place in my chest. Abandoned. As if I hadn't spent 31 months of overtime shifts paying it off. As if flying to another country to run medical clinics for people who have nothing was the same thing as walking away from responsibility. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue with him in front of Gary, because I already knew arguing was exactly the terrain where Kyle wins, where charm and volume beat facts every time. Instead, I opened my folder, pulled out the title, and set it on the counter in front of the clerk, whose name tag read Mrs. Nunez. "I'd like to confirm ownership before this transfer goes any further," I said to her. "My name is Tessa Monroe. This vehicle is titled solely in my name." Mrs. Nunez looked between the three of us over the top of her glasses, unbothered by the tension. The exact kind of neutral, professional calm I recognized from my own job. The calm of someone who has seen every version of a family dispute walk through her door and has learned not to get pulled into the emotion of any of it. She picked up the title Kyle had already handed her minutes earlier, the one he'd apparently brought in a folder of his own, and compared it to the one I'd just placed down. "These match," she said simply. Then she looked at Kyle. "Sir, your name isn't on this title anywhere. Whose name is Tessa Monroe?" The lobby didn't go silent exactly. There were still other conversations happening at other counters, but the little cluster around us went very quiet. Gary, still holding his cashier's check, looked at Kyle with the expression of a man realizing he might be standing in the middle of something he didn't sign up for. "That's me," I said. "I'm Tessa Monroe. This is my car." Kyle's face changed fast, the charm dropping into something sharper. "It's a family car, technically," he said, directing this more at Gary than at me now. Like he was trying to salvage the sale rather than address the actual problem. "My sister's been out of the country for months. We've basically been managing it as a family. This paperwork stuff is just a formality. We can sort it out." "There's no formality here," Mrs. Nunez said, still calm, still procedural. "In Arizona, the seller's name on a bill of sale for a title transfer has to match the name on the title itself. Or we need documentation showing legal authority to sell on the owner's behalf." "Do you have power of attorney, sir?" Kyle didn't answer right away, which told me everything. "No," he admitted after a pause. "But she knew about this. This isn't news to her. She's just being dramatic because I didn't call her first." I felt that word land, too. Dramatic. The way it always does in my family. the way it's been used to describe every boundary I've ever tried to set. I didn't flinch this time. I have the storage agreement my father signed when I left the car at their house, I said, sliding the second document across the counter. It states clearly that the vehicle belongs to me and is being stored temporarily, with no transfer of ownership implied. I also have my insurance policy, I added, sliding a third page forward, which lists me as the sole named insured. And I have never at any point authorized an additional driver. Nunez read through each page methodically, the way I imagine I read through a patient chart, checking dates against dates, names against names, looking for the place where the story stops matching the paperwork. There's also this, she said, pulling something from the folder Kyle had submitted before I arrived. This transfer form was already flagged before you came in, ma'am. The buyer's information matches, but the seller's signature line was filled in with a name that doesn't match the title. I was going to reject it at processing regardless. Gary's face had gone from confused to visibly annoyed. He looked at Kyle, cashier's check still in hand, and said the only thing that mattered to him in that moment. Wait, so this whole thing wasn't even legit? I paid you $11,000, man. It's fine. It's just a paperwork issue. We can fix it, Kyle said. But his voice had lost its earlier ease. He turned back to me, and this time the counterattack came sharper, more personal. You know what? This is so typical. You leave for months at a time, you don't call, you don't check in, and then the one time somebody actually steps up to deal with something at home, you swoop in and act like a victim? Mom and Dad have been dealing with this car sitting there for months. I was doing everyone a favor. You sold something that was never yours to sell, I said. That's not a favor. That's not family management. That's theft. And now it's documented theft because you just tried to complete it in front of a DMV clerk with my title still active. Documented, Kyle repeated, like the word offended him personally. You and your little folders. You've been keeping receipts on your own family this whole time? That's insane, Tessa. That's actually insane. It's called a record, I said. I keep records because in my job, if I don't, people get hurt. I didn't think I'd need to apply that at home, but apparently I do. Mrs. Nunez set the paperwork down and addressed all three of us in the same even tone she'd used the entire time. The tone of someone who has zero interest in the family drama and total interest in getting the facts correct. I can't process this transfer. The title holder is present and does not consent to the sale. The seller information on this form does not match the registered owner, and there's no power of attorney on file. This transaction is void. Gary let out a short, frustrated breath and looked at Kyle. So I need my money back. Right now. I don't have it right now. It's tied up, Kyle said. And for the first time all day, his voice cracked slightly under the weight of a problem he couldn't smooth over with charm. That's your problem, not mine, Gary said. You told me this was clean. You showed me maintenance records. You told me your sister signed off on this. I want my check back. Or I want the $11,000 back in cash by end of week. Or I'm filing a police report for fraud. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't triumph exactly. It was something quieter, more like relief, mixed with a strange kind of grief, watching my brother's confidence collapse in real time in front of a stranger. Knowing that this was the version of accountability he had built for himself, brick by brick, over years of assuming nobody would ever check the paperwork. My parents arrived about 10 minutes later. Having apparently been told by Kyle earlier that morning to come by around 11 to see the car handed off, which told me he had planned to present the whole thing to them as a done deal. A smooth family transition before I ever had the chance to say a word. My mother walked in first, saw the four of us standing at the counter, Gary red-faced and furious, Kyle pale and cornered, me holding a folder of documents, and Mrs. Nunez calmly stacking rejected paperwork into a labeled tray. "What is going on?" my mother said, her voice already defensive before she even had the facts. "Kyle tried to sell my car," I said, without my knowledge, without my signature, without any legal authority. "The DMV just caught it and voided the transaction." "It's not that dramatic," my mother said immediately. And there it was again, that word, dramatic. The family's favorite tool for shrinking any real grievance down to something manageable and dismissible. "It's just paperwork, Tessa. He was trying to help while you were gone." "You always turn things into a whole production." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to argue her into understanding. I just stated the fact plainly. "It's not paperwork, Mom. It's my car. My name is the only one on the title. My name is the only one on the insurance. My name is the only one on the storage agreement Dad signed." Kyle collected a cashier's check for $11,000 for something he never owned. My father had come in behind her, and he was quiet for a long moment, looking at the documents spread across the counter, at Gary's furious expression, at Kyle's silence. I watched something shift in his face, the particular expression of a man realizing he had signed something without reading what it actually meant, or worse, had understood exactly what it meant, and had let it slide anyway, because confronting his son was harder than confronting the truth. "I didn't think he'd actually sell it," my father said quietly, mostly to me. "I thought he was just talking. I signed that storage agreement because you asked me to, and I should have paid more attention when he started saying he had a buyer lined up. I let it happen because it was easier than arguing with him about it. I'm sorry, Tessa." It wasn't a big apology. It wasn't the kind of moment that fixes everything in an instant, but it was more honesty than I'd gotten from him in years, and I recognized it for what it was worth. Gary, still standing there with his void cashier's check, was losing patience with the family drama unfolding around him. "I don't care about any of this," he said. "I want my money. Today." Kyle finally spoke, quieter now, all the charm gone. "I'll get it to you by Friday. I have to move some things around." "You have until Friday," Gary said, "or I'm calling a lawyer and the police. And I'll make sure everyone in this DMV remembers your name too." He walked out without another word, and I watched Kyle stand there for a moment, staring at the counter like it had betrayed him personally, before turning to look at me with something between anger and desperation. "You could have just told me you were coming," he said. "You could have handled this like a normal person, instead of ambushing me in public." "I didn't ambush you," I said. "I let the truth catch up to you." "Those are different things. You've always thought you were better than the rest of us," he said, his voice rising slightly, now that Gary was gone and he had less audience to perform for, more room to be genuinely angry. "Off saving the world overseas, while we're the ones actually here, dealing with everything, holding things together. You don't get to just show up and act superior because you've got a folder full of paperwork." "I'm not acting superior," I said. "I'm telling you facts. My name is on the title, my name is on the insurance, my name is on the agreement Dad signed. None of that has anything to do with where I was or what I was doing. It has to do with who legally owns the car you tried to sell." Nunez, who had been quietly processing other paperwork while this unfolded, looked up at that point and addressed the group one more time. Her tone as unbothered as it had been from the start. For what it's worth, this happens more than people think. Family members assume shared use means shared ownership. It doesn't. The title is the only thing that matters here, and this title says Tessa Monroe. I thanked her, and I meant it more than she probably realized. She hadn't taken sides. She hadn't needed to. She had simply read the documents in front of her and applied the rule that already existed. The rule that had been protecting me the entire time without anyone in my family ever bothering to check it. My mother tried one more time to smooth things over as we all stood in that fluorescent lobby. Can we please just go home and talk about this like a family instead of standing in a government building making a scene? There's no scene to make anymore, I said. The transfer was voided. Kyle owes Gary his money back. That's not a family conversation. That's just what happens next. We didn't drive home together. I drove my own car, the CRV, key in my own hand, out of that DMV parking lot alone. And it was the first time in months that sitting in that driver's seat felt like it belonged to me again, instead of like something I had to defend. The days that followed weren't a dramatic reconciliation, and I want to be honest about that too. Because I think stories like this sometimes get wrapped up too neatly, and that's not what real repair looks like. Kyle scraped together the $11,000 by Friday, mostly by pulling from a savings account he and his wife had for their kids' school fund. Something I only found out about later through my mother, who mentioned it like it was a tragedy that had happened to Kyle, rather than a consequence of a decision he made. He paid Gary back in full. Along with an extra $500, Gary demanded as a fee for his wasted time, and the DMV filing fee that had already been charged. Kyle never apologized to me directly. He sent one text a week later that said, "Hope you're happy," which told me everything I needed to know about whether he understood what had actually happened. My mother's version of accountability came out during a phone call about 2 weeks later, when she called to ask if I was coming to a family dinner. When I brought up what had happened, gently, not looking for a fight, just looking for acknowledgement, she said, "I really think you're holding on to this more than you need to." It was paperwork, Tessa. Nobody got hurt. The car's back with you now, isn't it? Can we just move forward? I didn't argue with her. I've learned that some people will never see a boundary as anything other than an overreaction, no matter how much evidence you put in front of them. And my mother is one of those people. I told her I loved her, and I told her I needed some space around Kyle for a while, and I left it there. My father's apology, small as it was, stayed the most honest thing anyone in my family said to me through the whole ordeal. A few weeks later, he called me separately, without my mother on the line, and told me he'd talked to Kyle about giving back the spare key to the house he'd been using to let himself into my parents' garage whenever he wanted. The same key that had let him move my car around, take it to the detailer, drive it to meet a buyer, without me ever knowing. I should have asked more questions when he said he had it handled, my father said. I let the driveway story be easier than the real one. I'm sorry I did that. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the version of accountability I might have wanted from all three of them equally. But it was real, and I let it be enough from him, because unequal repair is still repair, even when it comes from only one direction. I changed every spare key after that. Not just to the car, but to my apartment, to the storage unit I eventually rented instead of ever leaving anything at my parents' house again. To the small filing cabinet I keep at my mother's house for documents I still, for sentimental reasons I can't fully explain, want to store near family, even after everything. I went through drawer by drawer, key by key, matching each one against the accounts and doors it opened, cutting new copies. and keeping a small labeled list of exactly who, if anyone, held a copy of what. It's the same instinct that makes me chart medications precisely at work. If I don't know exactly where a key or a signature can go, I can't be surprised later by where it ended up. If any part of this sounds familiar, drop a comment and tell me where the paperwork finally caught up with your family's version of the story. The last spare key I dealt with was the one my brother had used to get into the garage that whole time. An old key on a faded lanyard I'd forgotten I even had, one from a hospital badge program years ago. Back when I did a short rotation at a local Phoenix clinic before I moved into international relief work. The lanyard had a hospital logo half worn off from years of handling, a strip of laminate peeling at the edge, and somewhere along the way, probably during a family gathering years earlier, when everyone tossed their keys into the same bowl by the door, that lanyard had ended up holding a spare house key that eventually got copied for the garage. I found it in a kitchen drawer at my parents' house during a visit a month after the DMV incident, tangled with rubber bands and old batteries. And when I picked it up, I recognized it immediately, not because of the key itself, but because of that lanyard. The one I used to wear clipped to my scrubs during 12-hour shifts before I ever set foot in another country. I remember standing in that kitchen, holding it, thinking about how strange it was that something meant to identify me, to say clearly who I was and where I belonged, had ended up being the exact object that let someone else move through my life without my permission. If you've ever found the exact object that explained how someone got access to something they shouldn't have, tell me what it was in the comments below. I asked my mother about it directly that day. Do you know who's had a copy of this? She shrugged, the way she does when she doesn't want to answer something fully. I think Kyle grabbed one off the hook years ago when he was watching the house for us on vacation. I don't even remember exactly. I'm taking it, I said. And I'm having new keys cut for anything it opens. You really think that's necessary? She asked. Not quite a question, more a statement dressed up as one. Yes, I said. I do. I didn't ask permission after that. I took the lanyard home with me, and over the following weekend, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad. My old habit of documentation kicking in one more time. This time, not for a hospital chart or a vaccine log, but for my own life. I wrote down every key I owned, every door and vehicle and storage unit it opened, and next to each one, I wrote who currently held a copy. Where the answer included anyone besides me, I made an appointment to change the lock or recut the key that week. It took me 3 weekends to get through the whole list. My apartment locks, my storage unit, the small lockbox where I keep my passport and travel documents between deployments. The car, obviously, first and most urgent, a fresh set of keys cut the same week as the DMV incident. The old ones deactivated through the dealership's key fob system, so the copies Kyle might have made from the original wouldn't work anymore, even if he still had them. When I was done, I put the new set of keys on a plain black lanyard. Nothing sentimental about it, just functional. Easy to grab, easy to identify. But I kept the old hospital lanyard too, the faded one, the one with the worn logo and the peeling laminate strip. I didn't put a key back on it right away. It sat empty on my kitchen counter for a few weeks, just the lanyard itself, a small reminder of what it had meant to be trusted with access. And what it had cost when I extended that trust without checking where all the copies had gone. Eventually, I did put a key back on it, but only one, a spare house key to my own current apartment. The only copy of which I keep in a small fireproof box, labeled clearly, documented in the same notepad where I track everything else that matters to me now. I still have that lanyard. It sits in a drawer in my bedroom. Not hidden exactly, just kept. The way you keep something that reminds you of a lesson you don't ever want to have to relearn. My relationship with Kyle has not fully repaired, and I don't know if it will. We speak occasionally, mostly at family gatherings, mostly in short, careful sentences that avoid the subject entirely. My mother still refers to the entire event as that whole mess with the paperwork whenever it comes up, which is rare because she prefers it doesn't come up at all. My father, to his credit, has continued in small ways to be more careful with me since then. Calling to check in before agreeing to store anything else of mine, asking questions instead of assuming, which isn't a grand transformation, but it's more than nothing. And I've learned to let it be what it is. I still work overseas several months a year. I still come home to a city that doesn't always understand what I do or why I do it, and I still, apparently, I have to explain sometimes that being away doesn't mean being absent from the decisions that affect my own life. But now, when I leave, I don't leave a storage agreement in a drawer where only I remember it exists. I leave copies with a lawyer I trust, digital scans in 3 separate places, and a clear, documented understanding with anyone who touches anything of mine that their name being nowhere on a piece of paper means their permission is nowhere in the decision either. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that paperwork can protect you, even when family won't, and subscribe for more stories like it. The last time I drove past my parents' house, I glanced at the driveway out of habit, half expecting to feel that same old unease about what might be missing or moved or quietly reassigned in my absence. But my car was parked at my own apartment, locked, with keys only I hold, its title still exactly where it always should have been, in my name and no one else's. On my kitchen counter, that faded hospital lanyard hangs from a small hook by the door now, holding just the one spare key. A quiet reminder every time I leave for another deployment that some things are worth documenting precisely, checking twice, and never handing over without asking exactly who else might already have a copy.